Imagine, just for a moment, a world where the line between the divine and the mortal is thin, where gods watch over every part of life, and where their actions have a direct, often unpredictable, impact on the fate of humankind. In the ancient myths of Greece and Rome, these gods are not distant, cold figures. They are living, breathing beings who can love, hate, and even struggle with the very powers they wield. These gods are both greater than and equal to their human counterparts in many ways, as their stories often intertwine, sometimes in harmony, but more often in conflict. What if I told you that these myths are not just ancient stories, but a reflection of the forces that govern our own lives? The gods of ancient Greece and Rome are not just figures from an old, forgotten world. They are timeless representations of human nature. In a way, they mirror our greatest virtues and darkest flaws. The gods are beings of extraordinary power, yet they too face the internal battles of jealousy, fear, and desire. Human qualities that anyone listening could relate to. As we delve deeper into this world of myths, we begin by considering the nature of the gods themselves. The ancient Greeks and Romans believed in a world of divine intervention and constant interaction between gods and mortals. To them, the gods were everywhere. In the trees, the rivers, the mountains, and the winds. The gods control the skies, the seas, and the earth, but they also shape the hearts of men and women, their passions, their weaknesses, and their victories. Take, for instance, Zeus, the king of the gods. He ruled the sky with a thunderbolt in his hand, but his power was not just over nature. It was over the lives of mortals. His decisions could shape the course of empires or destroy them, all with a flick of his finger. Yet, for all his power, Zeus was not immune to the same desires that governed humans. He loved, he lusted, and he often acted out of jealousy or anger, affecting the lives of mortals in profound ways. His relationships with women, both mortal and divine, were full of intrigue, betrayal, and passion, and many of the great tales of Greek mythology revolve around the outcomes of these relationships. Then there was Hera, his wife and sister, the queen of the gods, who is often seen as the embodiment of marriage and motherhood. Yet, her relationship with Zeus was one marred by jealousy and resentment, as she struggled to accept his infidelities. The stories of their turbulent marriage speak not only of divine power, but also of the very human emotions that anyone could understand: jealousy, betrayal, love, and the quest for power. In this way, the gods were not so different from us at all. In contrast, we also find gods who seem more compassionate or less interested in the affairs of mortals. Athena, for example, the goddess of wisdom and strategy, is often portrayed as calm and collected, a figure who values intellect over emotion. Yet even she, with her unmatched wisdom, is not above the whims of the other gods. Her calm demeanor contrasts sharply with the wild passions of figures like Dionysus, the god of wine, revelry, and madness. Dionysus embodied the untamed and unpredictable forces of nature, and his myths often serve as a reminder of how unpredictable and chaotic life can be, even in the hands of a god. Then there's Poseidon, the god of the sea, who was as powerful as he was unpredictable. His mood swings could be as violent as the waves he controlled. His anger could send storms crashing across the seas, and his calm could bring a sense of peace to even the most treacherous waters. Poseidon was a god who, like the sea itself, could be both a provider and a destroyer, making him one of the most feared yet revered gods in the pantheon. As we look at these divine figures, it becomes clear that while they may be omnipotent, they are not flawless. They embody the full range of human emotions and traits, from wisdom and compassion to pride and wrath. This makes them both more relatable and, paradoxically, more distant. They are gods, but they are also reflections of ourselves, trapped in a web of emotions, desires, and decisions that often seem as though they could change the world. Yet, in the end, just like us, they must live with the consequences of their actions. Now, let's think about how these gods interact with humans. Mortals, in the eyes of the gods, were often little more than pawns in a larger game, their lives shaped by divine whims, and their destinies written in the stars. Yet, despite this, the mortals in these myths are never passive. They often rise up, defy the gods, or seek to change their fates. Heroes like Hercules, Perseus, and Odysseus challenge the gods with their bravery, intelligence, and willpower. These heroes often found themselves in impossible situations, only to emerge victorious after overcoming great odds. Take Odysseus, for example. His journey home from the Trojan War, which took 10 long years, is one of the most famous tales in mythology. But it's not just a story about battles and monsters. It's a story about perseverance, about a man who, despite facing the wrath of the gods, continues to push forward with determination. His encounters with gods like Poseidon, who sought to prevent his return home, and Athena, who aided him in his journey, are emblematic of how the gods could be both obstacles and guides. The tales of these gods and mortals are not just stories. They are lessons. Through them, the ancient Greeks and Romans sought to understand the world around them, to explain natural phenomena, and to make sense of human nature. But more than that, they sought to explore the moral implications of their own actions and the actions of the gods. These stories were their way of navigating a chaotic world, of trying to find meaning in a universe where divine forces seem just as unpredictable and uncontrollable as a human heart. And perhaps this is what makes these myths so enduring. They speak to something universal. While the gods and heroes may be figures of legend, their stories resonate with the very real emotions and struggles that we face in our own lives. We are not gods, but we are mortal beings, often caught in the tension between our desires and the consequences of our actions. We seek meaning, and sometimes, in our search for understanding, we find ourselves facing forces that are greater than ourselves. In these myths, the gods remind us that the path we walk is filled with uncertainty, with beauty, and with danger. The world of the ancient gods may seem distant, but it is closer to us than we realize. They are not just figures of legend. They are reflections of the very human nature that still resides within us. And as we explore their stories, we are reminded that the more things change, the more they stay the same. In the beginning, before the gods and mortals, there was only chaos, a vast, empty void that existed without form or order. From this abyss came the first primordial deities, born from nothingness itself, their existence marked by an eternal tension between creation and destruction. This was the origin of the universe as the ancient Greeks and Romans understood it, and it is in these earliest moments of existence that the foundation of the cosmos was laid. The world was not a harmonious place back then. It was a battleground of forces so powerful and ancient that even the gods themselves were but newborns, struggling to find their place in an ever-shifting reality. From chaos, two of the first primordial deities emerged, Gaia, the earth, and Uranus, the sky. These two entities represented the fundamental elements of the world, earth and sky, and their union would give birth to the first generation of gods. Yet, despite the beauty and potential of this union, it was also one marked by conflict. Gaia and Uranus, though deeply connected, were locked in a tumultuous relationship, one that foreshadowed the struggles to come between the forces of nature and the emerging deities. Uranus, in his power, sought to maintain control over the earth, and out of fear of what his children might become, he imprisoned them in the dark recesses of the underworld, a place of confinement and suffering. These children, the Titans, were strong, powerful beings destined to rule the world, but their potential was stifled by their father's fear. Gaia, the earth, in her sorrow and anger at the treatment of her children, could not bear to see them trapped. It was in her deep anguish that she plotted against Uranus, seeking a way to free her offspring from their father's cruel grasp. In this act of defiance, Gaia turned to her youngest and most courageous son, Cronus, and entrusted him with the task of overthrowing Uranus. Armed with sickle forged by Gaia herself, Cronus ambushed his father and castrated him, symbolizing a violent shift in the balance of power. The act of cutting off Uranus's power and strength was not just physical, but deeply symbolic, marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. Cronus, now victorious, became the ruler of the cosmos, and the Titans were freed from their imprisonment. But even as Cronus rose to power, he too feared the possibility of his own children overthrowing him, just as he had done to his father. The fear of being overthrown, of losing control, is an emotion that resonates through the ages, and Cronus, despite his triumph, was not exempt from it. To prevent his children from usurping his throne, he devoured each of them at birth, a brutal act that ensured his reign would go unchallenged. Yet, despite his efforts to maintain control, his wife Rhea, in an act of love and defiance, saved their youngest son, Zeus, by hiding him away in secret. Zeus, hidden from Cronus's wrath, grew in strength, nurtured by the care of the nymphs and raised away from the brutal world that had shaped his father. As Zeus matured, he became a symbol of hope and change, the embodiment of a new era that would bring balance to the cosmos. His eventual rise to power, fueled by his desire to free his siblings and defeat Cronus, marked the dawn of a new age, an age where the Olympian gods would rule over the earth and sky, where order would be restored, but only after a great battle between the forces of the Titans and the gods. The conflict between Zeus and Cronus was not merely a battle for power. It was a struggle between generations, between the old and the new, between the forces of stagnation and the promise of change. Zeus's victory was not just a personal triumph. It was a victory for all that he represented: growth, renewal, and the potential for a better world. With the defeat of Cronus, Zeus freed his siblings, who had been swallowed by their father, and together they began the task of shaping the world anew. The new gods, led by Zeus, were not just more powerful than their predecessors. They were different. They embodied different values and ideals, ones that sought to bring about a more ordered and harmonious world. While the Titans, led by Cronus, represented primal, uncontrollable forces, the Olympian gods, led by Zeus, symbolized a triumph of order and justice. This was a turning point in the creation of the world, where chaos gave way to the beginning of the cosmos as we know it, a cosmos shaped not only by the gods' power, but also by their wisdom and decisions. This transition from chaos to order was not just a cosmic event. It was a reflection of the human condition itself. The ancient Greeks and Romans understood that life was full of disorder, unpredictability, and conflict. But they also believed that through wisdom, courage, and the right choices, one could bring about order and meaning in a chaotic world. The myths of the gods and the battles they fought were metaphors for the struggles that humans face in their own lives, the constant struggle to find balance, to overcome obstacles, and to shape the world around them. As the Olympians rose to power, they were not just rulers of the heavens and the earth. They were the caretakers of human fate. Each god had a domain over an aspect of the world, and each would shape the lives of mortals in profound ways. Zeus, as king of the gods, ruled over the sky and thunder, but also over justice and law. Hera, his wife, ruled over marriage and family, but also embodied the complexities of love and jealousy. Poseidon, god of the sea, controlled the oceans and all that lived within them. Yet he was also a symbol of the unpredictable and uncontrollable forces of nature. The rise of the Olympians was not the end of the struggle between order and chaos. Rather, it marked the beginning of a new chapter in the ongoing dance between the two. The gods of the ancient world were not perfect beings, but they were symbols of the forces that shaped the world, forces that humans had to understand and navigate in order to thrive. In this way, the ancient Greeks and Romans looked to their gods not only for explanation, but also for guidance. The gods were reflections of the world they lived in, imperfect, powerful, and complex. And it was in these stories, these ancient tales, that the lessons of life were taught. Through the myths of creation, the ancient world found a way to explain the unexplainable, to understand the forces of nature, and to make sense of the human experience. The gods were not just divine beings. They were symbols of the emotional and psychological truths that all people face. They embodied love and loss, power and humility, jealousy and forgiveness, wisdom and folly. In their struggles, the Greeks and Romans saw a reflection of their own lives, and in their victories, they saw the hope that order could emerge from chaos. In this ancient world where gods and mortals intertwined, the stories were more than just entertainment. They were a way of understanding the world. The creation myths set the stage for everything that followed, offering a framework through which the ancients could understand not only their gods but also themselves. As we reflect on these myths, we are reminded that, even in the face of chaos, there is always a potential for change, for growth, and for the restoration of order. And in that sense, the ancient myths continue to resonate, not only as tales of the past, but as timeless reflections of the human experience. At the pinnacle of the ancient world stood the 12 Olympian gods, beings of immense power and influence, each of whom played a crucial role in shaping both the cosmos and the lives of mortals. These gods ruled not just over the heavens, the earth, and the seas, but over the very principles of justice, love, war, and wisdom. Though all-powerful, they were far from perfect. Their interactions with each other and with humans often marked by passion, jealousy, and unpredictable behavior. Their lives were woven into the fabric of Greek and Roman mythology, their stories acting as lessons on the nature of power, fate, and human emotions. At the head of the Olympian gods was Zeus, king of the gods and ruler of the sky. He was the one who brought order to the universe after overthrowing the Titans and establishing the reign of the Olympians. Zeus wielded the mighty thunderbolt, a symbol of his power, and his rule extended to all aspects of existence, weather, law, and justice. Yet despite his supreme power, Zeus was also marked by contradictions. He was a god who sought to maintain order, but his own actions often disrupted that very order. His numerous love affairs, both with mortals and immortals, led to a series of complex relationships, some of which resulted in children who were destined for greatness or tragedy. While he was revered for his wisdom and leadership, Zeus was also feared for his temper and for the unpredictable nature of his decisions. His relationships, particularly with his wife, Hera, were often strained, filled with jealousy and anger, and these personal dramas had lasting consequences, both the gods and the mortals they interacted with. Hera, queen of the gods and goddess of marriage and family, was Zeus's wife and sister. She was powerful in her own right, known for her fierce protection of marriage and her jealousy towards those who threatened its sanctity. Hera's role as a mother and protector made her a figure of both compassion and wrath. Her love for her children was unquestionable, but her jealousy toward Zeus's infidelities often led her to take drastic measures, punishing both mortals and immortals who cross her path. Her conflict with Zeus, fueled by his infidelities and his numerous affairs, reflected the complex nature of their relationship, where love, resentment, and power played out in a continuous cycle of conflict. Hera's stories often involved revenge, but they also reflected the deep vulnerabilities that come with love, loyalty, and betrayal. Poseidon, the god of the sea, was another of the Olympian gods, known for control over the oceans, storms, and earthquakes. Poseidon's power was immense, and like the sea itself, his mood could shift from calm and serene to violent and unpredictable. His temper could bring catastrophic storms, and his calm could bring a peaceful sea. His domain over the seas also made him a god whose influence extended far beyond the shores of Greece. Sailors and travelers prayed to him for safe passage, but they also feared his wrath, for he could easily bring destruction with the wave of his trident. In his mythological tales, Poseidon was often seen as a god who craved power and control, but who also experienced deep frustration when he was not given the respect he felt he deserved. His role as protector of sailors was counterbalanced by his desire to dominate the world around him, especially in his fierce competition with the other gods for power. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, was a key figure among the Olympians, known for her intellect, strategy, and just nature. Born fully grown and armored from the head of Zeus, Athena represented the triumph of reason and intelligence over brute force. She was the goddess of strategy, offering counsel to heroes and guiding them through difficult decisions. While she was associated with war, her approach was not one of mindless violence. She favored strategy, wisdom, and foresight. Her calm demeanor and thoughtful nature made her a figure of wisdom, and her assistance to heroes like Odysseus and Perseus was instrumental in their success. Athena's wisdom, however, did not come without its own challenges. She was often forced to navigate the complex relationships between gods and mortals, trying to bring justice and reason to a world often driven by emotions and passions. Her rivalry with Poseidon for the patronage of Athens was a reflection of the tension between intellect and raw power, a theme that runs through many of her myths. Ares, the god of war, was a polar opposite to Athena. Where Athena represented the strategic, controlled aspect of warfare, Ares embodied the brutal, violent side of battle. He was a god who reveled in conflict and bloodshed, his very presence on the battlefield a symbol of chaos and destruction. Unlike Athena, who sought to bring order through war, Ares was driven by the passion and fury of combat, often acted without consideration for the consequences of his actions. His relationship with his fellow gods was strained, as they viewed him with disdain and fear. Despite his lack of popularity among the Olympians, Ares' role in Greek mythology was undeniable, as he personified the darker side of human nature, the bloodlust, the anger, and the destruction that comes with conflict. Then there was Apollo, the god of the sun, music, and prophecy. He was the embodiment of harmony and balance, often portrayed as the ideal god, handsome, wise, and talented in many fields. Apollo was a patron of the arts, inspiring musicians, poets, and philosophers. He was also a god of healing and medicine, with the power to both cure and cause disease. His association with prophecy made him a figure of great reverence, as mortals sought his guidance in times of uncertainty. Yet Apollo, despite his many talents and virtues, was not without his flaws. His arrogance, particularly in matters of love, led to tragic outcomes, such as the story of Daphne, who fled from him in fear, turning into a laurel tree to escape his advances. Apollo's tales often reflected the conflict between his idealized image and the more complicated reality of his relationships and desires. Artemis, Apollo's twin sister, was the goddess of the hunt, wilderness, and the moon. She was a protector of women and children, known for her fierce independence and her ability to defend herself and others. Unlike many of the other Olympian gods, Artemis was often depicted as solitary, preferring the company of nature and animals to that of humans. Her connection to the wilderness made her both a nurturing and vengeful figure, for she could bring both healing and harm. The story of Actaeon, who was transformed into a stag and torn apart by his own hounds for accidentally seeing Artemis naked, showed her vengeful side. Yet Artemis was also a symbol of female strength and autonomy, embodying the ideals of self-sufficiency and protection. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, beauty, and desire, was another key figure in the Olympian pantheon. Born from the sea foam, Aphrodite was the embodiment of beauty and attraction, her presence capable of igniting passion and desire in gods and mortals alike. Yet, her love and beauty were not always a source of joy. Her affairs, particularly with Ares, led to jealousy and betrayal, and her beauty, while captivating, also created conflict. Aphrodite's myths often explore the complexities of love, its power to unite and divide, to heal and hurt. Her relationship with her husband, Hephaestus, was one of the more tumultuous ones among the Olympians, reflecting the tension between love and lust, fidelity and infidelity. Hephaestus, the god of fire, metalworking, and craftsmanship, was the god who created the weapons, tools, and treasures of the gods. Unlike many of the other Olympians, Hephaestus was not known for his beauty or strength, but for his skill and ingenuity. He crafted armor for heroes like Achilles and built the palaces of the gods themselves. Despite his invaluable contributions, Hephaestus was often seen as an outsider among the Olympians, particularly because of his deformity. He was born lame, which made him different from the other gods. His relationship with Aphrodite, who was often unfaithful to him, also highlighted the deep contrast between his inner qualities and his external struggles. Each of the Olympian gods represented not only different aspects of the world around them, but also different facets of human nature. Their myths were more than just stories of gods with superhuman abilities. They were reflections of the challenges, emotions, and contradictions that all humans face. The gods, in their interactions with one another and with mortals, embodied the full spectrum of human experience, from love and wisdom to jealousy and vengeance. These gods were complex, multifaceted beings, and their stories continue to resonate with us today, not just as ancient myths, but as reflections of the eternal struggle between order and chaos, light and dark, love and conflict. In the heart of Greek mythology lies the tale of Prometheus, a titan whose defiance of the gods set the stage for one of the most profound and lasting acts of rebellion in ancient mythology. Prometheus was not a typical titan, one who sought to rule or dominate. Rather, he was a figure driven by compassion, intelligence, and an unyielding desire to aid humanity. His name, which means forethought, reflects his deep concern for the future of mankind. Unlike the Olympians, who were often preoccupied with their own power struggles and desires, Prometheus saw something unique in humans. He recognized their potential, their vulnerability, and their need for guidance, and it was this recognition that would lead him to challenge the gods themselves. At a time when humans lived in darkness and ignorance, unable to create fire or use it to sustain their lives, Prometheus saw their suffering and felt compelled to act. Fire, in ancient times, was more than just a tool. It was a symbol of knowledge, warmth, and civilization. Without it, humanity remained primitive and helpless, struggling to survive against the cold and the dangers of the wild. Prometheus, knowing that fire could transform human existence, made the bold decision to defy Zeus, the king of the gods, and steal fire from Mount Olympus. He descended from the heavens to the mortal world, carrying the precious flame in a fennel stalk, an act that symbolized both the theft and the gift of knowledge. Prometheus did not simply take fire for himself. He gave it to humanity, sharing the divine power with the very being Zeus and the other gods had often viewed as insignificant and unworthy. By giving fire to mortals, Prometheus not only provided them with the means to survive, but also ignited a spark of creativity and progress that would set them on a path of discovery and innovation. This was an act of pure selflessness, driven by a belief in potential humanity to rise above its limitations. However, this gift came at a great cost. Zeus, enraged by Prometheus's audacity, saw this act as a direct challenge to his authority and power. Fire, in Zeus's eyes, was not meant for mortals. It was a divine gift that should remain under control of the gods. By stealing fire, Prometheus had not only undermined Zeus's rule, but had also defied the very order of the cosmos. In response, Zeus exacted a terrible punishment on Prometheus. He ordered that the Titan be bound to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, where an eagle would come each day to feast on his liver. Prometheus's immortality meant that his liver would regenerate overnight, so the eagle would return again and again, perpetually torturing the Titan in a cycle of endless suffering. This punishment, though cruel and unforgiving, highlights the nature of divine authority in Greek mythology. The gods, for all their power, were not immune to their own insecurities and flaws. Zeus's reaction to Prometheus's rebellion was not just an act of punishment. It was a demonstration of the gods' fear of losing control over the mortal world. The theft of fire was a symbolic act of humanity's potential to rise above the divine, to create and discover beyond the boundaries set by the gods. Prometheus's defiance represented a challenge to the very foundation of the gods' power, their control over knowledge and progress. In this way, the myth of Prometheus is not just a story of a titan who gave fire to humanity. It is a story of humanity's struggle for autonomy, for the freedom to shape its own destiny. Yet, the tale of Prometheus is not merely one of suffering and punishment. It is also a story of hope, of sacrifice, and of the enduring bond between Prometheus and the mortals he sought to help. Despite his punishment, Prometheus never regretted his actions. His unwavering belief in humanity's potential, his dedication to their well-being, made him a symbol of selflessness and defiance. He did not act for fame or glory. He acted because he saw something within humanity that the gods did not. While the Olympians viewed mortals as insignificant, tools to be used and discarded, Prometheus saw them as beings capable of great things, of rising beyond their base instincts and achieving greatness. His gift of fire was a beacon of that potential. Prometheus' story also underscores the tension between knowledge and power. In a world ruled by gods who were protective of their divine gifts, knowledge was a weapon, a force that could overthrow the established order. By giving fire to mortals, Prometheus provided them with the means to challenge the gods, to unlock the secret of the world, and use them to their advantage. Fire was not just a physical element. It was a symbol of enlightenment, of discovery, and of the intellectual and creative power that would allow humanity to transcend its mortal limitations. In this sense, Prometheus could be seen as a figure who represented the pursuit of knowledge and wisdom, even in the face of immense sacrifice. For the mortals who received the gift of fire, it was more than just a means of survival. It was a spark of creation. With fire, humanity was able to cook food, build shelter, and protect themselves from the dangers of the world. But fire also symbolized the beginning of progress, of the potential for invention, for the arts, for civilization itself. Prometheus's gift marked the beginning of humanity's journey from ignorance to enlightenment, from a world of darkness and fear to one of light and possibility. However, the gift of fire also carried with it a darker side. The myth of Prometheus does not ignore the consequences of this newfound knowledge. With fire came the capacity for destruction, for war, and for conflict. Fire could be used to create, but it could also be used to burn and destroy. This dual nature of knowledge, the potential for both creation and destruction, was a central theme in Greek mythology. It was a reminder that power, in any form, is never without its risks and consequences. The gods, in their wisdom, understood this duality and kept fire from humanity for so long, because they knew that once it was in mortal hands, there would be no turning back. The myth of Persephone is one of the most poignant and layered tales in Greek mythology, touching on themes of transformation, rebirth, and the eternal cycles of nature. Persephone, the daughter of Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, was known for her beauty, grace, and gentle nature. She lived in a world of warmth, spring, and abundance, surrounded by flowers and sunlight, a world that her mother, Demeter, nurtured with love and care. Demeter, the goddess of the earth, ensured that her daughter lived in peace, protecting her from the hardships of the world. Yet, as with many myths, the serenity of Persephone's life was about to be shattered by forces beyond her control, forces that would shape not only her destiny, but the very cycles of life itself. The event that would change Persephone's life forever occurred one day as she wandered in a field, picking flowers. It was in this innocent moment that the earth beneath her feet suddenly parted, and from the depths of the underworld emerged Hades, the god of the dead. His chariot, drawn by black horses, appeared as if out of nowhere, and before Persephone could react, Hades took her in his grasp and carried her away to his dark and gloomy realm beneath the earth. The kidnapping of Persephone was swift and brutal, and in the blink of an eye, the bright and colorful world of her childhood was replaced by the shadowy, silent expanse of the underworld. Demeter, upon discovering the disappearance of her daughter, was filled with anguish and despair. She searched the earth tirelessly, calling out for Persephone, but her cries went unanswered. The goddess of the harvest, usually associated with fertility and growth, was now consumed with sorrow, and the earth itself began to mirror her grief. Crops failed, flowers wilted, and the once lush fields became barren. The seasons began to shift, and winter, a symbol of death and desolation, began to take hold of the world. Demeter's grief was not just personal, it was cosmic. As she mourned, the very essence of life was stifled, and the earth turned cold and inhospitable. In the midst of this suffering, Demeter sought out the help of Zeus, the king of the gods, pleading for the return of her daughter. Zeus, understanding the gravity of the situation, sent messengers to the underworld to negotiate with Hades. Hades, however, was unwilling to let Persephone go. He had fallen in love with her, and though his realm was dark and dreary, it was now where he wished to keep her. Hades, as lord of the underworld, had long been isolated and alone, and Persephone, with her beauty and warmth, became a source of comfort and companionship in his otherwise cold and lifeless kingdom. Yet, despite his desire to keep her by his side, the gods were unwilling to let Persephone remain in the underworld forever, and a compromise had to be reached. Zeus intervened, and after much negotiation, a deal was struck. Persephone would return to the earth, but only for part of the year. The time she spent in the underworld would be balanced by her time above ground, where she would be reunited with her mother and bring life and growth to the world once again. This arrangement, while not ideal for either Demeter or Persephone, was the only solution that could restore balance to the earth. However, there was a catch. Before leaving the underworld, Persephone had eaten 6 pomegranate seeds, a fruit that held symbolic meaning in Greek mythology. The consumption of these seeds bound her to the underworld, and as a result, she was required to return to Hades for a portion of each year. The seeds represented the inescapable bond between Persephone and the underworld, a bond that would forever tie her to the realm of death. When Persephone returned to her mother, Demeter's joy was immense. The earth bloomed again, flowers blossomed, and crops grew in abundance. Spring and summer returned, and the earth was filled with life. Yet, as the months passed, Demeter knew that the time would soon come when she would have to part with her daughter once more. The myth of Persephone's annual descent into the underworld and her return to the earth explains the cycle of the seasons. Winter represents Persephone's time in the underworld, a time of death and dormancy, while spring and summer represent her time above ground, when the earth comes alive with growth and fertility. The myth of Persephone is rich with symbolic meaning. At its core, it reflects the cycles of nature, the inevitability of death and rebirth, the transition between life and the afterlife, and the constant shifting of the seasons. Persephone's journey between the underworld and the earth mirrors the transition between life and death, with each return to the earth symbolizing a renewal, a fresh beginning. Her time in the underworld, on the other hand, represents the period of rest and dormancy that precedes new growth, the quiet and stillness that is necessary for life to begin anew. In this way, Persephone embodies a delicate balance between opposing forces, life and death, light and dark, growth and decay. Her story reminds us that death is not an end but a part of a continuous cycle, one that is essential for the renewal of life. It is through the depths of the underworld that the earth can be reborn, and it is only by embracing the darkness of winter that the brilliance of spring can emerge. Persephone's journey, therefore, is not one of victimhood, but of empowerment. She is both a prisoner and a queen, both a daughter of the earth and a ruler of the underworld. Her power lies in her ability to navigate between these two realms, to bring forth life from death, and to reconcile the eternal cycle that governs the universe. Furthermore, Persephone's myth touches on themes of transformation and personal growth. Her abduction by Hades and her time spent in the underworld are not merely a form of punishment or sorrow. They are a rite of passage. Persephone is not the same goddess who was taken from her mother's side. She has changed, evolved, and grown stronger through her experiences in the underworld. She learns to navigate the complexities of the afterlife, gaining wisdom and strength from the darkness she encounters. Her return to the earth is not just a reunion with her mother, but a return to the world as a transformed being, one who now carries with her the knowledge of both the living and the dead. Persephone's story, therefore, is not just about the seasons, nor is it merely a tale of a daughter's bond with her mother. It is a story of balance, of transformation, and of the eternal struggle between life and death. It speaks to the cyclical nature of existence, to the way in which every death brings with it the possibility of new life. Persephone's journey from the light of the earth to the shadows of the underworld and back again is a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is a potential for growth and renewal. It is through the cycles of loss and return that the world finds its rhythm, and it is through Persephone's journey that we come to understand the delicate dance between the forces of life and death that shape our world. The story of Orpheus is one of the most tragic yet beautifully poignant in all of Greek mythology, a tale that intertwines love, music, loss, and the power of art to shape both the human soul and the world around it. Orpheus, born with an extraordinary gift for music, was the son of the muse Calliope and the god Apollo, which meant that he was born with an inherent connection to the divine. His music was unlike anything heard before. It was said that when Orpheus played his lyre, the trees would sway, the rivers would change course, and even the wild animals would pause in their tracks to listen. His songs were not merely beautiful. They had the power to soothe, to calm, and even to inspire change in the very fabric of nature itself. Orpheus's music could touch the hearts of gods and mortals alike, and through his melodies, he could speak to the deepest corners of the human soul. Orpheus's greatest love was Eurydice, a nymph who embodied the beauty and fragility of life. Their love was pure and unblemished, a perfect union of two souls bound together by fate. The joy that they shared in each other's presence was profound, and for a time it seemed that nothing could tear them apart. However, the capriciousness of fate would soon intervene, and their love, which once seemed eternal, would be tested by the cruelest of circumstances. One fateful day, as Eurydice wandered through a meadow, she was bitten by a venomous snake and fell to the ground dead. Her death plunged Orpheus into an unbearable grief. His world, once filled with the beauty of his music and the warmth of his love for Eurydice, was now shrouded in darkness. Overcome by sorrow, Orpheus swore that he would not rest until he had brought his beloved Eurydice back from the realm of the dead. His resolve was as unwavering as his love for her, and so, with his lyre in hand, he set out on a journey that would take him to the heart of the underworld itself. Orpheus's descent into the underworld was a journey that mirrored his own inner torment. As he traveled deeper into the realm of the dead, his music became both his solace and his weapon. The spirits of the underworld, even the most fearsome of the dead, were moved by the power of Orpheus's song. The Furies, who were known for their vengeful nature, were soothed by his music, and the very gates of the underworld seemed to open before him as he played. His melodies reached the hearts of Hades and Persephone, the rulers of the underworld, and even they could not remain unmoved by the depth of his sorrow and the beauty of his music. Moved by Orpheus's devotion and the power of his art, Hades agreed to grant him the impossible. Eurydice would be allowed to return to the living world with him, but on one condition. Orpheus was forbidden from looking back at her until they had both reached the surface. If he looked back before that moment, she would be lost to him forever, condemned to remain in the underworld. This condition, though simple, carried with it the weight of immense temptation. Orpheus, whose music could charm the gods themselves, was now faced with a test that would push the limits of his love and his trust. The journey back from the underworld was filled with a quiet tension and almost unbearable anticipation. Orpheus, walking in front of Eurydice, could hear the sound of her footsteps behind him. He longed to look back, to see her, to reassure himself that she was truly there, but the promise he had made to Hades held him back. As the minutes stretched into hours in the distance between them, and the underworld grew, the temptation to glance behind him became overwhelming. His heart, full of love and longing, urged him to turn around, but his mind, driven by the knowledge that one glance would cost him everything, forced him to stay resolute. And yet, despite his best efforts to resist, the doubt gnawed at him, the fear that she was not truly there, that he had somehow lost her again. Finally, as they neared the surface, just as the light of the living world began to touch the edges of the underworld, Orpheus could no longer bear it. He turned to look at Eurydice, and in that instant, the dream of their reunion was shattered. As he gazed upon her, she began to fade, her form dissolving into the air, drawn back into the depths of the underworld. She reached out to him, but it was too late. Orpheus's heart broke as he saw her slip away from him once more, and in that moment his soul seemed to shatter as well. Eurydice was lost to him forever, and there was no second chance, no return from this final loss. The tragedy of Orpheus is one that resonates deeply with the human experience, as it speaks to the complexities of love, loss, and the fleeting nature of life itself. Orpheus's journey into the underworld and his eventual failure to reunite with Eurydice highlight the tension between desire and reality, between the ideal and the achievable. His music, which had once been a source of joy and transformation, becomes a vehicle for his deepest sorrow, a constant reminder of what is lost and what can never be regained. The beauty of Orpheus's art, which had the power to move mountains and touch the divine, could not save him from the cruel hand of fate. It was in this that the true tragedy lay. But the myth of Orpheus also carries with it a deeper message about the role of art in human life. Orpheus's music, which could bring solace to the gods and move even the dead, symbolizes the power of creativity and expression to transcend the ordinary limitations of the human experience. His music was not merely a tool of entertainment or distraction. It was a bridge between the mortal and the divine, a means of communicating emotions and truths that words alone could not express. Orpheus's journey is a testament to the redemptive potential of art, even in the face of overwhelming loss. His music, though unable to prevent the tragedy of his love, still served as a means of connecting with the world beyond the living. In a sense, Orpheus's tragedy is not just the loss of Eurydice, but the understanding that even in the most profound sorrow, there is still a purpose to the music, still a meaning to the expression, even if it is a meaning that can never fully be understood. The myth also explores the idea of trust and the human tendency to question what we believe to be true. Orpheus's failure to keep his faith in the promise he made to Hades speaks to the deep uncertainties that come with love and desire. His instinct, driven by fear and doubt, led him to make a choice that irrevocably changed his fate. In this way, the myth reflects the internal struggles we all face when confronted with uncertainty and the unknown. Orpheus's loss is not just his own. It is a loss that comes from every human decision that is made in the face of doubt, the loss that accompanies every unfulfilled promise, every hope dashed by the weight of fear. In the end, Orpheus's fate was sealed not just by the gods or by his failure to resist temptation, but by his unrelenting love and his deep, unyielding grief. His tragedy is not just a tale of a man who lost his love. It is a story about the power of music, the complexity of the human heart, and the way that both love and art can shape our experiences for better or for worse. Orpheus's music, though it could not bring back his lost love, would live on as a testament to the beauty and pain of his journey, a melody that echoes through the ages as a reminder of the eternal dance between life, death, and love. The myth of Medusa is one of the most tragic and misunderstood stories in Greek mythology, a tale that explores themes of beauty, jealousy, punishment, and the fine line between victim and villain. Medusa, once a beautiful mortal woman, lived a life that was marked by her charm and grace. Her beauty was so extraordinary that it attracted the attention of many suitors, but it was not just her beauty that made her special. She was also known for her kindness and her devotion to the goddess Athena. However, as is often the case in mythology, The fates of the gods and mortals are intertwined in complex and often painful ways, and Medusa's beauty would eventually lead to her downfall. Medusa's story begins in a time when she was a priestess of Athena, a goddess who valued chastity and purity above all else. As a servant of Athena, Medusa had taken a vow of celibacy and devoted herself entirely to the service of the goddess. Her life was one of service, peace, and devotion, yet was also one of beauty and temptation. Medusa's hair was said to be her most striking feature, cascading in golden waves, and it was this beauty that would ultimately bring about her ruin. One day, while Medusa was in the temple of Athena, she caught the eye of Poseidon, the god of the sea. Poseidon, known for his passionate and often unpredictable nature, was immediately struck by her beauty. He desired her, and in his mind there was no other way to claim her but to force himself upon her. Despite Medusa's position as a priestess, bound by vows of chastity and purity, Poseidon did not hesitate. He took Medusa in the very temple of Athena, a sacred space that was meant to be untouched by such acts. The violation of the temple itself made this act even more egregious, and it was this moment of cruelty and betrayal that set the stage for Medusa's transformation. Medusa, devastated by the assault, fled the temple, feeling both humiliated and forsaken by the very goddess she had served so faithfully. She sought solace in her grief, but Athena, the goddess of wisdom and justice, was not moved by Medusa's plight. Instead, Athena's response was one of anger and punishment. In a swift and unforgiving act, Athena transformed Medusa's beautiful hair into serpents, twisting and writhing in place of the golden locks she once had. Her face, once captivating and enchanting, was turned into something monstrous, with a gaze that could turn anyone who looked upon her into stone. The very beauty that had been her gift became her curse, and Medusa, now a monster, was cast away from society, forced to live in isolation. Athena's punishment was harsh, but it was also a reflection of the complex nature of the gods themselves. While Athena was often seen as a goddess of wisdom, justice, and protection, her actions in Medusa's case revealed a more merciless side to her character. Athena's response to Medusa's assault was not one of empathy or understanding. Instead, she punished the victim of crime for crime itself, transforming Medusa into a creature feared and reviled by all. It is this element of the myth that raises important questions about the nature of justice, punishment, and the way in which victims are often blamed for their suffering. Medusa, now a creature of terror, was exiled to the farthest reaches of the earth, where she lived alone, surrounded by the desolation of her own monstrosity. She became a symbol of fear and revulsion, her once beautiful form now a grotesque reflection of her punishment. Her hair, now made of living snakes, hissed constantly, and her gaze, which once would have inspired love, was now a deadly weapon, capable of turning anyone who dared look into her eyes into stone. She was no longer a woman, but a monster, feared and shunned by the world she once belonged to. Her transformation was not just physical. It was psychological as well. Medusa, once a symbol of beauty and grace, became a living embodiment of punishment and shame, her identity irrevocably altered by the god's decision to punish her rather than show her mercy. Yet, despite her monstrous transformation, Medusa's story is not simply one of villainy. It is a story of victimization, of the deep injustice that occurs when those in power fail to protect the vulnerable. Medusa's transformation into a monster was not of her own making. She was a victim of Poseidon's assault, and yet, in the eyes of the gods, she was punished for the very thing that had been done to her. The cruelty of Athena's punishment is evident in the way Medusa is treated, cast out, isolated, and demonized for an act that was beyond her control. She becomes a symbol not of evil, but of the consequences of a world that fails to recognize the humanity of those who have suffered. Medusa's story is also deeply intertwined with that of Perseus, the hero who would ultimately be tasked with slaying her. Perseus, the son of Zeus and Danae, was given a dangerous mission by King Polydectes, who sought to rid himself of Perseus in a plot to marry his mother. Polydectes, knowing that Perseus could never refuse such a daunting task, sent him on a quest to kill Medusa and bring back her head. The myth of Perseus and Medusa is one of the most famous in Greek mythology, and it highlights the contrasting roles of heroism and monstrosity. Perseus, armed with gifts from the gods, including a shield from Athena, a sword from Hephaestus, and winged sandals from Hermes, set out on his quest to slay the monster. Athena, who had once cursed Medusa, now offered her aid to Perseus, guiding him on his journey and helping him to avoid Medusa's deadly gaze. Perseus, with the aid of his divine gifts, approached Medusa while she slept, using the reflection in his shield to avoid looking directly at her. With a swift strike, he decapitated Medusa, severing her head and bringing it back as a trophy. The death of Medusa, while seemingly the culmination of her story, is not the end of her influence. Her head, even after death, retained its power, and it was used by Perseus in his later adventures, most notably when he used it to turn the Titan Atlas to stone. In this way, Medusa's legacy lived on long after her death, as her gaze continued to hold the power to petrify anyone who dared look at it. The Trojan War is one of the most famous and enduring tales in Greek mythology, a story that has been told and retold in countless forms throughout the centuries. It is a tale filled with heroism, betrayal, love, and tragedy, set against the backdrop of a world on the brink of collapse. The war itself, a brutal and devastating conflict, was not just a result of one moment's decision, but the culmination of years of tension, pride, and anger. The events leading up to the war itself, and its aftermath are a tapestry of human emotions and divine interference, illustrating the complex relationships between gods and mortals, fate and free will, honor and vengeance. The origins of the Trojan War can be traced back to a seemingly trivial event, one that would set in motion a series of events that would change the course of history. The myth begins with the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, two divine beings whose marriage was attended by all the gods of Mount Olympus. However, one goddess, Eris, the goddess of discord, was not invited. Angered by this slight, Eris decided to cause chaos at the wedding. She threw a golden apple into the midst of the celebration, inscribed with the words for fairest. Three goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, each claimed the apple as their own, believing themselves to be the most beautiful of the goddesses. The dispute over the apple was brought before Paris, a prince of Troy, who had been chosen to judge the contest. Each goddess offered him a bribe to sway his decision. Hera promised him power and dominion over the world. Athena offered him wisdom and victory in battle, while Aphrodite, the goddess of love, promised him the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris, swayed by the allure of Aphrodite's promise, awarded her the golden apple, setting off a chain of events that would lead to the downfall of Troy. Aphrodite's gift to Paris, Helen, was no ordinary woman. She was considered the most beautiful mortal in the world, the daughter of Zeus and Leda. She was already married to Menelaus, the king of Sparta, but her beauty made her a prize coveted by many. Paris, aided by Aphrodite, abducted Helen and took her back to Troy, igniting the wrath of Menelaus. The abduction of Helen was not just a personal betrayal, but a violation of the sacred bonds of hospitality, a grave offense in the ancient world. Menelaus, enraged by the loss of his wife, called upon the other Greek kings and leaders to honor an oath they had sworn years earlier to defend Helen's marriage and bring her back. The Greek response to the abduction was swift and decisive. Led by Menelaus and his brother Agamemnon, the Greek forces gathered to march on Troy and retrieve Helen. The greatest Greek heroes, including Achilles, Odysseus, and Ajax, answered the call, and a massive army was assembled. The Greeks set sail for Troy, and the war that would last for 10 long years began. The Trojan War, however, was not merely a battle between two armies. It was a war shaped by the interference of the gods. The gods of Mount Olympus took sides, with some supporting the Greeks and others supporting the Trojans. Zeus, the king of the gods, sought to remain neutral, but his interference in the affairs of mortals was inevitable. Hera, who bore a deep grudge against Paris for his judgment, supported the Greeks, while Athena, too, fought on their side. On the Trojan side, Aphrodite, who had been the cause of the war, continued to support Paris and the Trojans, while Apollo and Artemis fought on their behalf. The gods' involvement in the war was not limited to passive support. They actively intervened in the battles, influencing the outcomes, and even engaging in direct combat. The gods were often seen as more powerful and unpredictable than the mortals, and their actions shaped the fate of both the Greeks and the Trojans. It was clear that the war was not just a mortal conflict, but a divine contest as well, with the gods using the war as a way to settle their own grudges and desires. As the war dragged on for years, both sides suffered tremendous losses. The Greeks, despite their superior numbers, were unable to breach the walls of Troy, while the Trojans, though fierce in their defense, were unable to drive the Greeks away. The war seemed to be at a stalemate, and both sides grew weary. It was during this time that one of the most famous episodes of the war occurred. The battle between Hector, the greatest of the Trojan warriors, and Achilles, the greatest of the Greek warriors. Achilles, a demigod whose mother was the sea nymph Thetis, was nearly invincible, his body invulnerable except for his heel. He was a fierce and relentless warrior, and his rage was unmatched on the battlefield. However, Achilles' wrath was not only directed at his enemies, it was also directed at his own allies. During the war, Achilles had a falling out with Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek forces, over the capture of a Trojan priestess, Perseus. In his anger, Achilles withdrew from the fighting, leaving the Greeks without their greatest hero. Without Achilles, the Greeks were at a disadvantage, and the Trojans, led by Hector, pushed the Greek forces back. The death of Achilles' close friend Patroclus, who was killed by Hector while wearing Achilles' armor, was a turning point in the war. Consumed by grief and rage, Achilles returned to the battlefield, seeking revenge for Patroclus' death. The confrontation between Hector and Achilles was one of the most dramatic moments of the war. Achilles, driven by his overwhelming desire for vengeance, killed Hector in single combat and dragged his body behind his chariot, refusing to give it back to the Trojans for a proper burial. The death of Hector was a devastating blow to the Trojans, but it was not the end of the war. The Greeks, despite their victories, were still unable to break the walls of Troy. It would take a final, cunning trick for the Greeks to claim victory. The idea for the Trojan horse, a massive wooden horse hollowed out to hold a small group of Greek soldiers, was conceived by Odysseus. The Greeks pretended to give up their siege and left the horse as a supposed gift to the Trojans, who, thinking they had won, brought the horse inside the city walls. The story of Odysseus, particularly his long and arduous journey home following the fall of Troy, is one of the most celebrated in Greek mythology. Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, is a man defined not only by his intelligence and cunning, but also by his deep sense of loyalty and love for his family. His journey, spanning 10 years after the Trojan War, is not merely a tale of adventure and peril, but also one of self-discovery, perseverance, and the enduring power of hope. Odysseus' Odyssey was not just a physical journey across the seas, but an emotional and psychological one, in which he faced not only external dangers, but also internal struggles, his will to return home constantly tested by gods, monsters, and his own choices. The epic journey begins immediately after the fall of Troy, where the Greek forces, having defeated the Trojans, begin their return home. However, the gods are not pleased with the Greeks' victory, and they impose numerous obstacles on their journey. For Odysseus, this is just the beginning of a series of trials that will stretch his will and endurance to their limits. His fleet is scattered by storms, and he finds himself at the mercy of forces far beyond his control, with the gods themselves playing a critical role in his fate. The first of these trials is his encounter with the Cyclones, a people living on the coast of Thrace, whom Odysseus and his men raid. However, their greed leads to disaster. The Cyclones retaliate, and many of Odysseus' men are lost. This encounter sets the tone for much of what follows. Odysseus' actions, whether out of necessity or desire, often bring unintended consequences, and the consequences are sometimes brutal and irreversible. After the disaster with the Cyclones, Odysseus and his men encounter the Lotus Eaters, a peaceful people who offer them a plant that causes those who eat it to lose all desire to return home. This episode highlights one of the central themes of Odysseus' journey, the tension between the desire to return home and the temptation to abandon everything and stay in a land of comfort and forgetfulness. Many of Odysseus' men succumb to the effects of the lotus, but Odysseus himself, ever determined, forces them back onto the ship, refusing to let them fall prey to the forgetfulness the lotus brings. It is this constant drive to return home that characterizes Odysseus throughout his journey. His ability to resist temptation, though sometimes tested, is a key factor in his survival. The next significant trial comes when Odysseus and his men encounter the Cyclops Polyphemus, a giant who lives in a remote cave. This is one of the most famous episodes in the entire Odyssey. Polyphemus traps Odysseus and his men in his cave, and one by one, he devours them. Faced with an almost certain death, Odysseus uses his wit and cunning to devise an escape. He convinces the Cyclops to drink wine, and when Polyphemus falls asleep, Odysseus and his men drive a sharp stake into his single eye, blinding him. They then escape by hiding under the sheep of the Cyclops, and as they sail away, Odysseus makes the fateful mistake of revealing his true identity. This act of pride and hubris invites the wrath of Polyphemus' father, Poseidon, god of the sea. Polyphemus curses Odysseus, pledging that he will never return home, and thus begins a string of misfortunes that will plague Odysseus for the rest of his journey. Poseidon's curse is perhaps the most significant divine obstacle Odysseus faces. Throughout his journey, the god of the sea continues to oppose him, sending storms and shipwrecks, keeping Odysseus from reaching Ithaca for far longer than he would have otherwise. Despite this, Odysseus never loses his resolve. He continues to fight for his home, even as he is buffeted by the anger of the gods and the forces of nature. His encounters with the gods, particularly the goddesses who aid him, such as Athena and Circe, contrast sharply with Poseidon's relentless pursuit to prevent his return. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and warfare, takes a particular interest in Odysseus, aiding him with advice and divine intervention, while Circe, a powerful sorceress, initially transforms Odysseus' men into swine, but later helps him, giving him the guidance he needs to survive future trials. These encounters with the divine serve as both tests and aids, as Odysseus' journey is never simply about physical endurance. It is also about navigating the moral and ethical challenges that arise from interacting with powerful and often unpredictable deities. One of the most famous episodes in Odysseus' journey occurs when he and his men visit the land of the dead. Here, Odysseus seeks the guidance of the prophet Tiresias, who tells him the challenges that still lie ahead. This journey to the underworld is significant not only because it gives Odysseus crucial information about his fate, but also because it marks a moment of reckoning. In the underworld, Odysseus encounters the souls of his dead comrades and his own mother, Anticlea, who reveals the deep grief and sorrow that his long absence has caused. This moment of emotional pain is compounded by the realization that his journey has not only cost him his men, but also the love and stability of his home. This encounter with the dead reminds Odysseus of the consequences of his actions and the sacrifices made along the way. It also reinforces the central theme of homecoming. What he has fought for all these years is not just a return to his kingdom, but a return to his family, his responsibilities, and the life he left behind. The sirens are another challenge that Odysseus faces during his journey. These creatures, half woman, half bird, sing songs that lure sailors to their deaths. Odysseus, aware of their danger, orders his men to plug their ears with beeswax, while he himself, desiring to hear their song, has himself tied to the mast of the ship. The siren song represents the ultimate temptation, knowledge, beauty, and allure that, if not controlled, can lead to destruction. Odysseus' ability to resist this temptation, by literally binding himself, is a powerful symbol of his struggle to maintain focus on his goal and resist the distractions that would take him off course. As Odysseus nears the end of his journey, he faces one final, harrowing trial, the encounter with Scylla and Charybdis, two monsters who inhabit opposite sides of a narrow strait. Scylla, a six-headed monster, devours any sailors who come too close, while Charybdis is a whirlpool that can swallow entire ships. Odysseus, understanding that he cannot avoid both, chooses to sail closer to Scylla, sacrificing a few of his men to avoid the entire ship being lost. This decision reflects the harsh realities of leadership and the often impossible choices that must be made in times of crisis. No decision is without its cost, and Odysseus must come to terms with the sacrifices he must make to achieve his goal. Finally, after years of wandering, Odysseus returns home to Ithaca. However, his journey is not yet complete. He finds that his home has been overtaken by suitors vying for his wife Penelope's hand. In a final test of his cunning, Odysseus, disguised as a beggar, devises a plan to defeat the suitors and reclaim his throne. The myth of Arachne is one of transformation, pride, and the consequences of hubris, where a mortal's extraordinary skill and arrogance lead to a tragic downfall. Arachne was a young mortal woman from Lydia, renowned for her unparalleled talent in weaving. Her tapestries were said to rival the very creations of the gods themselves, their intricacy and beauty beyond compare. Arachne's skill was so remarkable that it quickly earned her the admiration of many, but it also sparked something more dangerous within her, a sense of pride. She came to believe that her weaving was not just a reflection of her talent, but that she was superior to the gods themselves. She boasted that she could weave a tapestry more beautiful than that of Athena, the goddess of wisdom, strategy, and weaving, who was also considered the patroness of craftsmen. Athena, hearing of Arachne's boastful challenge, decided to confront her, disguised as an old woman. She visited Arachne and warned her against such arrogance, advising her to humble herself before the gods and to recognize the limitations of human skill in comparison to divine power. Athena's message was clear. While mortal talent could be exceptional, it was never to be considered equal to the divine, and pride in one's abilities could lead to ruin. However, Arachne, filled with youthful arrogance, rejected Athena's advice. She did not fear the gods, and her confidence in her own craft was absolute. She boldly repeated her challenge, daring to compete with Athena in a weaving contest, with the stakes being the loser accepting whatever punishment the winner deemed fitting. The contest began, and Arachne wove with such skill and precision that even Athena was impressed. Her tapestry depicted the gods in a less than flattering light, showing them as flawed, often behaving badly, and indulging in their desires and vices. Each god was portrayed in scenes of deception, jealousy, and vengeance, with the most notable scene being that of Zeus, the king of the gods, using his powers to seduce and manipulate mortals, an act that was known to have caused much chaos in the mortal world. The imagery was bold, direct, and unafraid of mocking the god's authority. Athena, on the other hand, wove a tapestry that depicted her own power and wisdom. She chose to show scenes of the gods in their most glorious and divine light, highlighting their majestic qualities and divine nature. She portrayed the Olympians in their most virtuous aspects, demonstrating how they shaped the world through wisdom, skill, and justice. Athena's tapestry was meticulous, detailed, and a true reflection of divine excellence. But despite her expertise and divine influence, the work lacked the audacity and striking commentary that Arachne's creation had. Athena's tapestry, though perfect in its execution, seemed almost too idealized, failing to capture the more complicated and flawed nature of the gods, which made Arachne's piece so powerful. When the contest ended, Athena inspected Arachne's tapestry, her face filled with mixed emotions. The challenge had been fair, and Arachne's skill was undeniable. But the content of the tapestry, which mocked the gods, was something Athena could not tolerate. Athena, enraged by the hubris that Arachne had displayed, was not content simply with winning the contest. She could not allow a mortal to so boldly insult the gods, especially with such an offensive portrayal. Athena's pride, too, had been wounded by Arachne's audacity. In her fury, Athena destroyed Arachne's tapestry and then, in a final act of punishment, transformed the young weaver into a spider. The transformation was both poetic and cruel. Arachne, who had once woven with skill that rivaled the gods, was now condemned to weave for eternity, her art becoming her curse. She was turned into a spider, forced to spin webs endlessly, her once remarkable skill now serving as a reminder of her pride and arrogance. She became a creature that wove in solitude, her webs never ending, always spinning but never creating the beauty she once achieved as a mortal. In this transformation, Arachne's tale became one of tragic irony. The weaver, who had once dared to challenge the divine, was now herself bound by an endless task that mirrored the very art she once mastered. Her story serves as a reminder of the dangers of pride and the price one must pay for challenging the gods. The myth of Arachne is layered with deeper meanings that reflect the human condition and the tension between talent, pride, and divine authority. At its heart, it speaks to the limits of human ambition and the consequences of overstepping one's place in the natural order. Arachne's skill as a weaver was extraordinary, but it was her arrogance and her refusal to recognize her mortal limitations that led to her downfall. While her story can be seen as a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris, it also touches on themes of artistic expression, the desire for recognition, and the struggle for power and autonomy in a world dominated by the gods. Arachne's defiance of Athena also raises questions about the relationship between mortals and the divine. Athena, as a goddess, represented not only the ideal of wisdom and skill, but also the authority of the gods over the lives of humans. Her actions toward Arachne were not just a response to the challenge, but a reinforcement of the divine hierarchy, where mortals must accept their place beneath the gods. This hierarchical structure is a recurring theme in many Greek myths, where gods and goddesses impose on mortals, often without mercy, and where the gods' power is absolute. The punishment of Arachne highlights the fear that many gods had of mortals who, through their talents or intelligence, could threaten the established order. It was not just Arachne's weaving that was problematic. It was her refusal to acknowledge the divine power that surpassed her own. Yet at the same time, Arachne's tale also reflects a potential for greatness in humanity. Her weaving was not simply an act of skill. It was an act of defiance. She used her art to comment on the world around her, to question the actions of the gods, and to challenge the status quo. Hercules, known to the Romans as Hercules, is one of the most famous and beloved heroes of Greek mythology. His life, filled with incredible feats of strength, courage, and perseverance, embodies the virtues and struggles of the human condition, showing both the heroic and tragic sides of what it means to be mortal. The 12 labors of Hercules, which he was tasked with completing as punishment for a crime he did not commit, represent not only physical challenges, but also moral and emotional trials that define his character and his journey. These 12 tasks, given to him by King Eurystheus, were meant to be impossible, but Hercules' determination, aided by his strength and divine heritage, made him one of the most enduring figures in mythology. Hercules' story begins with a moment of tragedy. He was the son of Zeus, the king of the gods, and Alcmene, a mortal woman. From the moment of his birth, he was marked for greatness. However, the circumstances of his birth were far from ordinary. Hera, the wife of Zeus, was filled with jealousy at the birth of Hercules, knowing that he was the son of her husband and a mortal woman. In her wrath, Hera made Hercules' life difficult from the start. As a baby, he was sent into a frenzy by Hera's jealousy, and in this fit of madness, he accidentally killed his own children, believing them to be enemies. This tragic event became a defining moment in his life, marking the beginning of his punishment and his path toward redemption. The 12 labors, the heart of Hercules' myth, were assigned him as a way to atone for this horrible crime. Eurystheus, the king of Tyrants, assigned these impossible tasks to Hercules, hoping that they would be his undoing. The first of these labors was to slay the Nemean lion, a beast so fierce that no weapon could harm it. Hercules, however, using his immense strength and ingenuity, strangled the lion with his bare hands. Afterward, he wore the lion skin as a cloak, symbolizing his victory over the creature that no one else could defeat. This first labor set the tone for the rest of Hercules' trials, demonstrating not only his physical strength, but his ability to think creatively and solve problems that others could not. The second labor, the slaying of the 9-headed Hydra, presented an even greater challenge. The Hydra was a monster with multiple heads, and for each head that was cut off, 2 more would grow in its place. Hercules, with the help of his nephew Iolaus, used fire to cauterize the necks after each head was cut off, preventing them from regenerating. The Hydra, with its many heads and venomous breath, represented an almost insurmountable challenge, but through teamwork and perseverance, Hercules triumphed. This labor not only tested his strength, but also his capacity for strategic thinking and collaboration, qualities that made him a hero beyond mere brawn. The third labor, the capture of the Ceryneian hind, was another test of Hercules' skill and patience. The hind, a sacred creature of Artemis, was known for its incredible speed and agility. Hercules was tasked with capturing it without harming it, a seemingly impossible task given the creature's swift and elusive nature. He pursued the hind for a full year before finally capturing it, showcasing his determination and his respect for gods, as he ultimately returned the hind unharmed to Artemis after completing the task. In his fourth labor, Hercules was asked to capture the Erymanthean boar. This boar was a terror of the countryside, wreaking havoc on the land and the people. Hercules used his strength and cleverness to drive the boar into a snowbank, where he was able to trap it. This labor highlighted his relentless drive and ability to tackle even the most dangerous of beasts, symbolizing his role as a protector of the people. The fifth labor, the cleaning of the Augean stables, was one of the most unique of the 12. The stables, belonging to King Augeas, had not been cleaned in years, and they were filled with an overwhelming amount of filth. The task seemed impossible, as the stables housed thousands of cattle. However, Heracles approached the challenge with ingenuity, diverting 2 rivers to wash out the filth. This labor demonstrated Heracles' ability to think outside the box, using not just strength, but also his intellect and resourcefulness to solve problems that seemed insurmountable. Heracles' sixth labor, the slaying of the Stymphalian birds, was yet another test of his resourcefulness. These birds were dangerous, with sharp metallic feathers that they could launch at their enemies. Unable to fight them directly, Heracles used a rattle given to him by Athena to scare the birds into the air, where he was able to shoot them down. This labor illustrated Heracles' courage in facing fearsome foes and his willingness to use whatever tools or help were available to him, showing that even the mightiest heroes need aid at times. The seventh labor, the capture of the Cretan bull, required Heracles to tame a bull that was wreaking havoc on Crete. The bull had once been used in sacrifices to Poseidon but had escaped, causing chaos in the region. Heracles managed to overpower the bull and bring it back to Eurystheus, once again proving that no creature, no matter how powerful, was beyond his grasp. The eighth labor, the stealing of the Mars of Diomedes, was a dangerous and challenging task. The horses, which were kept by the king of Thrace, Diomedes, were wild and carnivorous. Heracles, with his usual bravery, managed to subdue the horses by feeding them their master, Diomedes, before taking them to Eurystheus. This labor, dark and morally ambiguous, reinforced Heracles' willingness to do whatever it took to complete his mission, even when the task required harsh measures. The ninth labor, the obtaining of the girdle of Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons, was yet another task that tested Heracles' strength and resolve. The girdle was a symbol of power and was desired by Eurystheus for his daughter. Heracles approached Hippolyta with diplomacy and kindness, but the goddess Hera intervened, spreading rumors that Heracles intended to abduct Hippolyta. A battle broke out, and Heracles was forced to fight the Amazons, eventually securing the girdle. This labor showed his ability to navigate complex relationships, even with powerful female figures, and highlighted his courage and fighting prowess. Heracles' 10th labor, the capture of the cattle of Geryon, took him on a long journey to the end of the world. Geryon was a 3-bodied monster, and his cattle were prized and protected by him. Heracles had to defeat Geryon and his guards in order to bring the cattle back. The journey, fraught with danger, was symbolic of Heracles' relentless pursuit of his goals, even when faced with seemingly insurmountable odds. The 11th labor, the stealing of the apples of the Hesperides, was one of the most difficult and mysterious tasks. The apples were guarded by a dragon, and the location of the garden was unknown. Heracles was forced to consult with Atlas, the titan who held up the sky, and ultimately took the apples from the dragon. Zeus and Europa is one of the more captivating and romanticized myths in Greek mythology, a tale that intertwines love, deception, and the fundamental relationships between gods and mortals. Europa was a beautiful Phoenician princess, the daughter of King Agenor, who ruled the ancient city of Tyre. Her beauty was renowned, captivating not only mortals but also the gods themselves. Her story begins on a fateful day when she was out gathering flowers by the shore. It was here that she first caught the eye of Zeus, the king of the gods, whose infatuation with her was immediate and overwhelming. Zeus, known for his many affairs with both mortals and immortals, found himself deeply taken with Europa. However, in his usual manner, he did not simply approach her in the way a mortal might. Instead, he took the form of a magnificent white bull, gentle and serene, knowing that this disguise would allow him to approach her without alarming her. The bull, with its shining white coat, appeared on the shores where Europa and her attendants were, and immediately Europa was drawn to the creature's grace and beauty. She marveled at the bull's calmness, its majestic appearance, and its extraordinary gentleness. It was a sight that filled her with wonder. As Europa approached the bull, she saw no threat in it, and with a curious heart, she reached out to stroke its back. The bull, in turn, knelt down, allowing Europa to climb onto its back, an act that further enchanted her. It was in this moment of seeming innocence that Zeus, still in the form of the bull, took his chance. Without warning, the bull stood up and sprinted off, carrying Europa away from her homeland and into the depths of the sea. Europa, in shock, held on tightly as the bull plunged into the waves. But her fear soon turned into awe and amazement as she realized the vastness of the world she was being swept into. The bull, now revealed as Zeus in disguise, swam across the Mediterranean Sea, taking Europa to the island of Crete, a place that would forever be tied to her story. There, on the shores of Crete, Zeus revealed his true form to Europa, explaining his divine nature and confessing his love for her. He promised her that she would be the queen of Crete and that she would be honored for eternity. Zeus, whose many romantic exploits were often marked by conflict and jealousy, approached Europa not only as a lover, but as a figure capable of bestowing upon her the riches and grandeur of the divine world. In his courtship, there was not only the allure of love, but also the promise of power and prestige, making Europa an eternal figure in the tapestry of divine relationships. Europa, though initially surprised, perhaps uncertain, accepted Zeus's advances. The two would go on to have 3 children, Minos, Rhadamanthys, and Sarpedon, each of whom would play significant roles in Greek mythology. Minos, the most famous of them, will become the legendary king of Crete, known for his wisdom and the establishment of the Minoan civilization. Rhadamanthys and Sarpedon would also play important roles in the mythological landscape, with Rhadamanthys becoming one of the judges of the dead and Sarpedon fighting bravely in the Trojan War. Europa, as the mother of these heroic figures, became central to the mythological history of Crete and Greece as a whole. However, the story of Europa and Zeus is not one of uncomplicated happiness. Though she became the queen of Crete, her abduction was not without its consequences. Europa's family, particularly her father, King Agenor, and her brothers, were devastated by her disappearance. They launched an extensive search, hoping to find her and bring her back to Tyre. But Europa, now settled on the island of Crete, could not return to her previous life. Her destiny was now tied to Zeus and to the island where she had borne him children. As for her father and brothers, their search ended in futility, and Europa was never seen again by her family, becoming one with the divine world. Europa's story was immortalized not only in Greek mythology, but also in the stars. The name Europa was given to one of Jupiter's moons, continuing her legacy long after her mythological life had ended. Her connection to Zeus and Crete became a symbol of the union between the mortal and the divine, a theme that runs through much of Greek mythology. The story also speaks to the complex nature of divine love and intervention. Zeus's actions, while driven by love, are not without their darker elements. The abduction of Europa, though romanticized in many retellings, remains a reflection of Zeus's power to shape the lives of mortals as he pleases. His use of deception, taking the form of a bull, was an act of manipulation, one that forever altered Europa's life and that of her family. In the context of Greek mythology, Zeus's actions can be viewed through the lens of divine will, where the gods are seen as acting in ways that humans might find incomprehensible or even unjust. Europa's life was shaped not by her own desires or choices, but by the desires of the gods. And while she was honored as a queen of Crete, her fate was one that she had little control over. This aspect of the story reflects the larger themes in Greek mythology, where mortals are often caught in the crossfire of the gods' whims and desires, and where divine love is not always portrayed as gentle or consensual. Despite these complexities, the myth of Zeus and Europa is often interpreted as a story of the transformative power of love, one that transcends the boundaries between the mortal and the divine. Europa, once a princess in Tyre, became the mother of future kings and heroes, and her children would go on to shape the destiny of Crete and the wider world. Her story speaks of the themes of fate and destiny that are prevalent in Greek mythology, where the lives of mortals are often determined by forces far beyond their control. Yet those same lives can lead to greatness and legacy if they are aligned with the gods. Zeus, in his pursuit of Europa, also reflects a divine nature of love that is both overwhelming and all-encompassing. His act of abduction, though forceful, ultimately results in a union that is fertile with meaning, as Europa's descendants become some of the most significant figures in the mythological world. Europa herself, though taken against her will, becomes a symbol of transformation as she moves from being a mortal princess to a revered figure in the divine world. The myth of Zeus and Europa also emphasizes the importance of Crete in the larger narrative of Greek mythology. Crete, the island where Europa was taken, became the seat of the Minoan civilization, one of the most advanced and influential cultures of the ancient world. The city of Knossos, with its labyrinthine palace, became a symbol of both myth and history, and Europa, as its queen, was often depicted as a founding figure in the civilization's legendary past. Her myth, intertwined with the island's history, reflects the connection between the gods, the heroes, and the civilizations they helped shape. In many ways, the story of Zeus and Europa is one of both loss and gain. Europa loses her previous life and family, but she gains a new existence in the divine world, marked by her connection to Zeus and her role as the mother of great kings and heroes. The story speaks to the transformative power of divine love, but also raises questions about consent, power, and the boundaries between mortals and gods. It is a myth that reminds us of the fragility of human life, the power of the gods to shape destiny, and the complexities of the relationships between the divine and the mortal. Europa's legacy, both as a figure in mythology and as a celestial body, lives on, continuing to inspire and challenge those who reflect on her story. The myth of Icarus is one of the most tragic and cautionary tales in Greek mythology, a story that delves into themes of ambition, hubris, and the inevitable consequences of overstepping one's limits. Icarus was the son of Daedalus, a brilliant inventor and craftsman who was famed for his extraordinary skill in creating complex devices and structures. Daedalus was the architect of the labyrinth on Crete, a vast maze that housed the Minotaur, and his ingenuity was unparalleled. However, despite his remarkable talents, it was his greatest invention, a pair of wings, that would ultimately lead to the downfall of his son, Icarus. The tale begins with Daedalus and his son being imprisoned by King Minos of Crete. Minos had been angered by Daedalus' role in helping the hero Theseus escape the labyrinth, and as punishment, he confined Daedalus and Icarus in a high tower. The father and son were held captive, but Daedalus, ever resourceful, quickly devised a plan to escape. He fashioned 2 pairs of wings, one for himself and one for Icarus, using feathers and wax. These wings were designed to allow them to fly, a miraculous invention that would free them from their prison. Daedalus, with his usual wisdom, carefully instructed Icarus on how to use the wings. He told his son to fly neither too high nor too low. Flying too high, Daedalus warned, would bring Icarus too close to the sun, causing the wax to melt and the wings to fall apart. Flying too low, on the other hand, would cause the damp sea air to weigh down the wings, making flight impossible. Icarus, eager to experience the thrill of flight, listened to his father's instructions but was overwhelmed by the exhilaration of soaring through the air. The feeling of freedom, the wind beneath his wings, was intoxicating, and as he ascended higher and higher, he became caught up in the joy of the moment, forgetting his father's warnings. With each beat of his wings, Icarus flew closer to the sun, his gaze fixed on the heavens above him. As he approached the sun, the heat grew stronger, and the wax that held the feathers together began to soften. Soon, the wings began to disintegrate, and with a horrifying realization, Icarus found himself falling from the sky. His wings, once a marvel of invention, had failed him, and Icarus plunged into the sea below, drowning in its depths. The tragic death of Icarus is a tale filled with layers of meaning. On the surface, it is a story of youthful recklessness and the consequences of not heeding the wisdom of experience. Icarus, full of energy and excitement, ignored his father's advice and paid the ultimate price. His fall is often seen as a symbol of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the human desire to transcend the natural limitations of the world. In his flight toward the sun, Icarus sought to rise above his mortal bounds, but in doing so, he flew too close to the source of life and power, only to be consumed by it. His hubris, the overconfidence that led him to ignore his father's caution, ultimately brought about his destruction. But the story of Icarus also carries a deeper, more universal message about the fragility of human existence. His fall from the sky is not just a physical event, but a reflection of the human condition, the constant struggle between aspiration and limitation, between desire and consequence. Icarus represents the eternal human dream of breaking free from the constraints of our mortal bodies and reaching for something higher. His fall, however, reminds us that no matter how great our ambitions, There are always forces beyond our control that can bring us down. The myth of Icarus, then, is not just a warning about the dangers of pride, but also an acknowledgement of the inevitability of human limits. There is also a profound sense of loss in the myth, not only in Icarus's death, but in the relationship between father and son. Daedalus, who had crafted the wings with such care, had done so out of love and hope for a future where he and his son could be free. His instructions were meant to guide Icarus safely, to allow him to experience the joy of flight without falling victim to the dangers of ambition. But Icarus's tragic end highlights the limits of parental control, the painful realization that even the most careful and loving guidance can be ignored in the face of youthful exuberance. For Daedalus, the loss of his son is compounded by the guilt and sorrow that follows. He had created the wings, but he had not been able to protect his son from his own desires. The myth of Icarus also invites contemplation on the nature of invention and creativity. Daedalus, the inventor, is a symbol of human ingenuity and the drive to solve problems and overcome obstacles. His creation of the wings was an extraordinary achievement, a triumph of intellect and craftsmanship. But the story also suggests that every invention, no matter how brilliant, carries risks. Daedalus's wings, which allowed for the possibility of flight, ultimately become instruments of destruction. This duality is present in many of the great myths. Inventions and advancements that push the boundaries of human experience often bring about unintended consequences. The wings, which were meant to grant freedom, became the very thing that led to Icarus's downfall. In addition to these themes of ambition and the limitations of human endeavor, the myth of Icarus also touches on the tension between freedom and control. Icarus, in his flight, experiences a fleeting sense of liberation, soaring through the sky and escaping the earth below. But his fall reminds us that freedom is not without its costs. To soar to great heights is to risk falling, and in Icarus's case, his ascent was his undoing. His story reflects the idea that the pursuit of freedom, while noble, can also be reckless, especially when it disregards the need for balance and caution. The myth suggests that freedom is not something that can be fully controlled or managed. It is a force that can both uplift and destroy, depending on how it is pursued. In the larger context of Greek mythology, the myth of Icarus is also a reminder of the role of fate. No matter how hard Daedalus tried to protect his son, the end was inevitable. Icarus's fall from the sky was written into the very fabric of his existence. It speaks to the idea that, despite our best efforts, certain outcomes cannot be avoided. The myth reflects a belief in Greek culture that the gods and the forces of nature ultimately control human destiny, and no matter how much one strives or struggles, there are forces beyond one's control that shape the course of one's life. Icarus, with his youthful impulsiveness, cannot escape this fate. His fall is an inevitable consequence of his actions, a reminder that human desires and ambitions are often thwarted by forces greater than ourselves. In modern times, the myth of Icarus continues to resonate as a symbol of the dangers of overreaching and the consequences of pushing boundaries too far. It serves as a reminder that human ambition, while capable of achieving great things, must also be tempered with humility and wisdom. The story of Icarus is not merely about the tragic death of a young man. It is a reflection of the eternal struggle between aspiration and limitation, between the heights we hope to reach and the earth that keeps us grounded. Icarus's fall is a symbol of the human condition, an aspiration to soar, a longing for freedom, an inevitable recognition that, despite our best efforts, we are bound by the very nature of our existence. The myth of Icarus, in its tragic simplicity, is a powerful commentary on the nature of ambition, hubris, and the complexities of human desire. It teaches us that, while we may strive for greatness and aim for the heavens, we must also recognize the limits of our power and the consequences of ignoring those limits. In the end, Icarus's story is not just a tale of flight and fall. It is a profound reflection on the fragile balance between the pursuit of dreams and the acceptance of our mortal boundaries. The myth of the labyrinth and the Minotaur is one of the most enduring and complex stories in Greek mythology, filled with symbolism, adventure, and tragedy. At the heart of this tale is the figure of the Minotaur, a creature that is both human and beast, representing the duality of human nature and the consequences of the gods' intervention in the mortal world. The Minotaur, a monstrous being with the body of man and the head of a bull, was born from a series of divine actions that reflected the unpredictable and often destructive power of the gods. The story begins with King Minos of Crete, who sought to establish his rule by gaining favor from the gods. To prove his legitimacy, Minos prayed to Poseidon, the god of the sea, asking for a sign that he was a rightful king. Poseidon, in response, sent him a magnificent white bull from the depth of the ocean, a creature of such beauty and strength that it was meant to be a token of the god's approval. However, Minos, driven by pride and greed, decided to keep the bull for himself rather than sacrifice it to Poseidon as he had promised. This act of defiance angered Poseidon, who sought to punish Minos for his broken promise. In retaliation, Poseidon caused Queen Pasiphae, Minos' wife, to fall in love with the bull. This unnatural passion, brought about by the vengeful god, led to the birth of the Minotaur, a creature that was both a symbol of divine retribution and a physical manifestation of the unnatural relationship between the queen and the bull. The Minotaur was a monstrous being, part man and part bull, trapped in a labyrinthine maze that Minos ordered to be built by the master craftsman Daedalus. The labyrinth, a maze of twisting passages and hidden chambers, was designed to contain the Minotaur, ensuring that the creature could never escape its prison. The labyrinth itself, with its complexity and confusion, serves as a powerful symbol of the human condition. It represents the intricate nature of fate and the way in which individuals can become trapped in their own desires, choices, and actions. Just as the labyrinth was designed to hold the Minotaur, so too do the myths surrounding it reveal how humans often find themselves lost in the twists and turns of their own lives, struggling to find a way out. The Minotaur, as a creature born from the wrath of the gods and the unnatural union of Pasiphae and the bull, embodies the destructive consequences of pride, broken promises, and divine intervention. The creature's existence, trapped in a labyrinth, also reflects the tragic fate that often accompanies hubris, the inability to escape the consequences of one's actions, no matter how hard one tries. As time passed, the Minotaur's hunger grew, and it became a terror to the people of Crete. Minos, in his desperation to control the creature, made a deal with Athens. Every year, Athens was required to send 7 young men and 7 young women to be sacrificed to the Minotaur, a tribute meant to appease the creature's hunger and keep the people of Crete safe from its wrath. This cruel tribute, forced upon Athens, resulted in great sorrow and fear, as the families of the sacrificed individuals were left devastated, knowing that their loved ones would never return. The sacrifice of these youths symbolizes the cruelty of power and the way in which the innocent often suffer due to the actions of the gods and rulers. The ritual became a yearly reminder of the consequences of Minos' defiance of Poseidon and the ongoing punishment that befell the people of Athens. However, the myth takes a turn with the arrival of Theseus, the hero of Athens, who decided that he would end the cycle of sacrifice and confront the Minotaur. Theseus, the son of King Aegeus, was determined to rid Athens of his cruel fate and to bring justice to the people who had been forced to endure the Minotaur's reign of terror. When Theseus volunteered to be one of the youths sent to Crete, his father Aegeus was filled with both pride and fear, knowing that his son was brave enough to take on such a dangerous task. He made Theseus promise that if he survived, he would raise a white sail on his return, signaling to Aegeus that he had triumphed. Upon arriving in Crete, Theseus was greeted by Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos. Ariadne had fallen in love with Theseus and, moved by his courage, decided to help him in his quest to kill the Minotaur. She gave Theseus a ball of thread, instructing him to unravel it as he ventured into the labyrinth. The thread, once unwound, would allow Theseus to find his way back after slaying the Minotaur, ensuring that he would not become lost in the maze. With this gift, Theseus entered the labyrinth, following the thread as he ventured deeper into its twisting corridors. The labyrinth itself, with its endless turns and deceptive pathways, serves as a metaphor for the complexities of life and the challenges that one must navigate to reach a goal. Theseus' journey through the labyrinth is not just a physical one, but a psychological and moral one as well. As he faces the Minotaur, he must confront not only the beast before him, but the inner struggles and fears that arise when one takes on a seemingly insurmountable challenge. The labyrinth becomes a representation of the trials and obstacles that people must overcome in their lives, where the path to success is rarely straightforward and often requires both courage and cunning. When Theseus finally comes face to face with the Minotaur, the confrontation is a brutal and violent one. Theseus, using his strength and determination, overpowers the creature, killing it with his bare hands. The death of the Minotaur marks the end of a long cycle of sacrifice and fear, and Theseus' triumph is celebrated as a heroic victory for Athens. Theseus' victory over the Minotaur represents the hero's ability to overcome the monstrous forces that threaten society and to restore order and justice. His triumph also symbolizes the power of reason, strategy, and determination in overcoming the chaos and dangers of the world. However, the story of the Minotaur does not end with Theseus' victory. His return to Athens is marred by tragedy, as he forgets to raise the white sail, a signal that would have assured his father of his survival. When King Aegeus sees a black sail on Theseus' ship, he believes the son is dead and, in his grief, throws himself into the sea, dying. The sea in which Aegeus drowned came to be known as the Aegean Sea in his memory. This tragic ending reflects the unpredictability of fate and the human tendency to overlook or forget even the most important promises in moments of triumph. Theseus, despite his great victory over the Minotaur, must now live with the weight of his father's death, a consequence of his failure to fulfill a simple yet crucial act. The myth of the Minotaur and the labyrinth is one that deals with the complexities of human existence, fate, and morality. It explores the consequences of pride and divine retribution, the human desire to conquer fear and challenge the monstrous forces in the world, and the tragic outcomes that often accompany even the greatest victories. The labyrinth, as a physical and metaphorical structure, serves as a symbol of the confusion, suffering, and complexity of life, and the Minotaur represents the dark and destructive aspect of the human psyche and the natural world. Theseus' victory is both heroic and tragic, as it brings about the end of a terrible cycle, but also leads to personal loss and reflection through the death of the Minotaur and the tragic aftermath. The myth reminds us of the delicate balance between success and failure, triumph and loss, and the unpredictable twists of fate that shape our lives. The story of Narcissus is one of the most powerful and tragic in Greek mythology, a tale that speaks to the dangers of self-obsession, the complexities of love, and the devastating consequences of vanity. Narcissus was a young man of extraordinary beauty, so handsome that he captivated everyone who looked upon him. His allure was such that it led to the unrequited love of many, both male and female. However, Narcissus, untouched by the affections of others, was blind to their love, enamored instead with his own reflection, lost in his own image. Narcissus was the son of the river god Cephissus and the nymph Liriope. From the moment of his birth, it was clear that he would grow into a figure of remarkable beauty. His appearance was so captivating that those who laid eyes on him were immediately struck by his extraordinary allure. Yet, while others fell in love with him, Narcissus had no interest in them. His heart was cold, untouched by the feelings of others. He was indifferent to the affections of the many suitors who sought his love, dismissing them as unworthy of his attention. This rejection of love, however, did not come from a place of cruelty, but from an inability to see beyond himself. Narcissus was so entranced by his own beauty that he had no room in his heart for anyone else. The gods, who often meddled in the affairs of mortals, took note of Narcissus's behavior. His constant rejection of love angered the goddess of love, Aphrodite, who decided to punish him for his vanity. To teach him a lesson, Aphrodite sent him a divine curse. Narcissus, while walking through the woods one day, came across a pool of clear water. Thirsty, he bent down to drink, but as he gazed into the water, he saw his own reflection. Captivated by the image of himself, Narcissus was unable to look away. The beauty he saw in the reflection was so mesmerizing that he became utterly entranced by it, unable to comprehend that the image was merely an illusion. He gazed at himself for hours, then days, unable to tear himself away from the vision that filled him with longing and desire. As he gazed into the water, Narcissus fell deeper and deeper into his obsession. He could not touch the reflection, for every time he reached for it, the image would ripple and disappear, leaving him with nothing but an aching emptiness. The love he felt for his own image was unrequited, for he could never possess the object of his desire. He grew weak from his inability to break free from the reflection, and eventually, unable to bear the torment any longer, he died staring into the pool. The gods, in their wisdom, transformed him into a flower, one that would forever face the water, eternally gazing at its own reflection. This flower, the narcissus, became a symbol of unrequited love and self-obsession, and the tragic fate of Narcissus served as a cautionary tale for mortals. The myth of Narcissus is often interpreted as a reflection of the dangers of excessive self-love and the consequences of ignoring the love and affections of others. Narcissus's downfall stems from his inability to connect with anyone beyond himself. His beauty, which should have been a gift, becomes his curse because he cannot see beyond it. He becomes trapped in his own image, unable to escape from the prison of his vanity. The lesson of his story is clear. Those who are consumed by self-love and pride will ultimately find themselves alone, cut off from the love and connection that others offer. Narcissus, in his obsession with his own image, is blind to the world around him, and it is his blindness that leads to his demise. However, the myth also speaks to the complexities of love and desire. Narcissus is not evil or cruel in his rejection of others, but rather a victim of his own inability to look beyond his surface appearance. His tragedy is not just that he falls in love with himself, but that he is so deeply caught up in his own image that he is unable to experience true love, the kind that is shared between individuals. His self-absorption isolates him from the world, and his tragic fate underscores the human need for connection and the importance of seeing beyond the surface to truly love others. Narcissus's death is symbolic of the emptiness that comes from loving only oneself. Without the capacity for empathy, affection, or connection with others, life becomes hollow. In the broader context of Greek mythology, Narcissus's story can be seen as a reflection of the consequences of excessive desire and the dangers of unattainable ideals. The gods, in their complex and often unpredictable nature, are sometimes seen as embodiments of both positive and negative qualities. In the case of Narcissus, his punishment serves as a reminder of the destructive potential of unchecked desires. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, in punishing Narcissus for his rejection of love, is not merely punishing him for being vain. She is also highlighting the importance of balance in love. True love, in Greek mythology, is not about possessing the object of desire, but about connection, mutual respect, and understanding. Narcissus's failure to understand this truth leads him to ruin, for his love is not for a real person, but for an illusion, a reflection that cannot return his affection. Another important element of the myth is the role of fate and divine intervention. Narcissus's life is shaped not only by his own actions, but by the influence of the gods. While he may have been a victim of his own vanity, his fate is ultimately sealed by Aphrodite's curse. This reflects a recurring theme in Greek mythology. The gods, with their immense power and unpredictable whims, often shape the lives of mortals, sometimes for better and sometimes for the worse. Narcissus, in his youthful arrogance, may have been blind to the emotions of others, but the gods, too, are portrayed as being blind to the consequences of their actions. Aphrodite's punishment, while just in her eyes, is harsh, and it results in the death of a young man who never had the opportunity to learn from his mistakes. Narcissus's story has endured for centuries, remaining relevant in modern times as a symbol of vanity, self-destructive love, and the dangers of living in isolation. His myth has inspired countless works of art, literature, and philosophy, and it continues to serve as a poignant reminder of the consequences of self-obsession. The narcissus flower, which grows by the water's edge, stands as a lasting symbol of his tragic fate, its bloom forever tied to the image of man who could never see beyond his own reflection. In contemporary interpretations, the story of Narcissus can be seen as a warning about the dangers of modern-day self-obsession, particularly in the age of social media and digital narcissism. In a world where appearances often take precedence over substance, and where the desire for validation and admiration from others can become all-consuming, the story of Narcissus speaks to the risks of becoming trapped in a cycle of superficiality and self-glorification. Narcissus, in his obsession with his reflection, becomes disconnected from the world around him, and his downfall serves as a powerful metaphor for the emptiness that comes from seeking love and validation from external sources rather than from within. Ultimately, the myth of Narcissus is one that explores the complexities of human desire and the consequences of unchecked vanity. It speaks to the dangers of looking too closely at oneself and becoming lost in one's own image, unable to connect with others. Narcissus's story is a tragic reminder that true fulfillment comes not from the adoration of oneself, but from the ability to see and love the world and others with open eyes and an open heart. The myth of Perseus is one of the most heroic and enduring tales in Greek mythology, representing the triumph of bravery, intelligence, and determination over overwhelming odds. Perseus, the son of Zeus and immortal Danae, is born into a world filled with danger and prophecy. His story, marked by his quest to slay the Gorgon Medusa, is not only about the battle between good and evil, but also about the hero's growth and his eventual role in shaping the destiny of both mortals and gods. Perseus' story begins with a prophecy. Danae, the beautiful daughter of King Acrisius of Argos, was locked away in a bronze chamber by her father after an oracle foretold that her son would one day kill him. Fearing this, Acrisius sought to prevent his daughter from bearing a child, but the gods had other plans. Zeus, enamored by Danae's beauty, visited her in the form of a golden shower, and from this union, Perseus was born. Acrisius, unable to prevent the prophecy, cast Danae and her infant son into the sea, where they were rescued by a fisherman named Dictys. Dictys took them to the island of Seriphos, where they were cared for by the king Polydectes. Polydectes, though initially kind to Perseus and his mother, soon grew greedy and saw Danae as a potential prize. In his pursuit of her, he sought to rid himself of Perseus, whom he saw as an obstacle to his desires. Polydectes tricked Perseus into promising to bring him the head of Medusa, one of the three Gorgons, whose gaze could turn anyone who looked at her into stone. Medusa, once a beautiful mortal woman, had been transformed by Athena as punishment for being raped by Poseidon in Athena's temple. Her transformation into a monster, with snakes for her hair and a petrifying gaze, made her a fearsome foe, and her death seemed like an impossible task. Perseus, despite the immense danger involved, accepted the challenge. He was determined not only to protect his mother from Polydectes, but also to prove his worth as a hero. However, he knew that defeating Medusa required more than mere strength. He sought the guidance of the gods, who took pity on him and provided him with several gifts that would help him succeed in his quest. Hermes, the messenger god, gave Perseus a pair of winged sandals that would allow him to fly, while Athena gave him a polished shield to use as a mirror, preventing him from looking directly at Medusa and being turned to stone. Additionally, he was provided with a sword capable of cutting through Medusa's petrified skin, as well as a bag in which to safely store her head. With these divine tools, Perseus set out on his journey, guided by the wisdom of Athena and the swiftness of Hermes. His quest took him to the remote lair of the Gorgons, where he encountered not only Medusa, but also her two immortal sisters, Stheno and Euryale. The Gorgons were fearsome creatures, and Perseus, using the reflection in his shield to avoid their deadly gaze, managed to approach Medusa while she slept. With a swift and decisive stroke, Perseus beheaded Medusa, sealing her fate. As he did so, the blood from her severed neck spilled forth, and from it sprang the winged horse Pegasus and the giant Chrysaor, both of whom would go on to play significant roles in later myths. After slaying Medusa, Perseus faced yet another challenge. He had to return to Seriphos with Medusa's head, without being pursued by the vengeful forces of the Gorgons or the gods. On his way back, Perseus encountered the beautiful princess Andromeda, who was chained to a rock as a sacrifice to the sea monster Cetus. Andromeda's mother, Queen Cassiopeia, had angered Poseidon by boasting that her daughter was more beautiful than the Nereids, and in retaliation, Poseidon sent Cetus to ravage the land. To appease the monster, Andromeda was left as an offering to it. Perseus, moved by her beauty and her plight, offered to save her in exchange for her hand in marriage. With the head of Medusa, Perseus turned Cetus to stone, and Andromeda was freed. Perseus and Andromeda returned to Seriphos, where they were greeted by Polydectes. Perseus, now a hero, used Medusa's head to turn Polydectes and his followers to stone, thereby freeing his mother from their tyranny. Perseus then gave the head to Athena, who placed it on her shield as a symbol of her power and protection. But Perseus' story does not end there. Though he had fulfilled his promise and accomplished great feats, the prophecy that had driven his journey was not yet fulfilled. Years later, during a sporting event in his hometown of Argos, Perseus accidentally struck and killed his grandfather, King Acrisius, with a discus. The prophecy had come true in a tragic and unintended way. Though Perseus had tried to outrun fate, it caught up with him, and the death of Odysseus marked the end of his hero's journey. Perseus, having fulfilled his destiny, left Argos and ruled over the island of Tiryns, where he and Andromeda had children who would go on to become legendary heroes in their own right. Perseus' story is one of great heroism and tragedy. His bravery, intelligence, and cunning allowed him to achieve the impossible. But it is also a story of the inescapable nature of fate. Throughout his journey, Perseus faces challenges that test both his physical and moral strength. His slaying of Medusa, though an act of immense bravery, is also a reflection of the darker side of heroism, the use of violence and the toll it takes on the hero. The beheading of Medusa, while necessary to fulfill his quest, comes with its own set of moral implications, as it requires the hero to wield immense power over life and death. Moreover, Perseus' relationship with the gods is central to his story. The gods, though often intervening in his life with gifts and guidance, also set him on a path that he could not control. While he is aided by Athena and Hermes, it is also their actions that dictate the course of his life. The divine gift he receives make him a powerful hero, but they also underscore the idea that heroes are, in many ways, products of the gods' wills. The gods shape the destiny of mortals, and even the greatest hero cannot escape the influence of divine power. The myth of Perseus also explores the theme of love and sacrifice. His journey to save Andromeda from the sea monster Cetus is not just a heroic act, but a reflection of his deep sense of compassion and duty. His willingness to risk his life to save her and later to marry her showcases the transformative power of love, which leads Perseus to a life of fulfillment and legacy. Perseus and Andromeda's marriage, though born from a heroic act, is one of mutual respect and devotion, and their descendants carry on the legacy of heroism. In many ways, Perseus' tale is a reflection of the hero's journey, a universal narrative found throughout myths and stories across cultures. It is a story of a young man who is thrust into an impossible situation, faces numerous trials, and ultimately triumphs over adversity. Along the way, he learns valuable lessons about strength, wisdom, and sacrifice. The myth of Perseus encapsulates the qualities of the hero: courage, determination, intelligence, and compassion, but also highlights the darker side of heroism, such as violence, fate, and unintended consequences. The legend of Perseus has remained an enduring symbol of heroism in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, and it continues to inspire tales of bravery, adventure, and the triumph of good over evil. His story is one of both personal growth and fulfillment of destiny, as he navigates the complex relationships between gods and mortals, life and death, love and loss. Perseus' journey reminds us that the true measure of a hero is not only in their accomplishments, but in the way they face their destiny, confront their fears, and come to terms with the consequences of their actions.